information there. Appreciate. Thanks, Gustav. Appreciate. Matthew, thank you. All right. Okay, so my job's calling me back. I will leave you guys to the next session that I'm sure you're gonna enjoy. And I see you around. Have a great day. Stay safe.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome, Matt Gordon.
Greetings. Let me know if the fan spinning is distracting. My home office is a bit warm today, so.
It might be just a little. Maybe if we could shift the camera just a little.
Yeah, well, hang on a second. I'll be right back. I just turned it off, so it'll stop. Yeah, I had the 2 of the 3 overhead lights blew a little bit ago, so I'm going with the natural light from the window so everybody can see me. And that'll work out just great unless a thunderstorm pops up. And then I'll be presenting in the dark, basically. I'm going to do a screen share check just to make sure we're good there. You see slide 1 of my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Yay. Okay. Okay, cool. And there are kind of some natural breaks in here for questions, so I won't. The way my screen setup is with Teams, I can't really monitor the chat. So if you just want to snag those, and I'll just say, hey, are there any questions? And if not, you're just going to watch me take a drink of water.
Okay. I'll keep an eye out for you.
Thank you.
So we are getting to the top of the hour. So are you about ready to do this?
Yeah. Let me I'll go ahead and take this.
So welcome everybody to the Global Summer Azure Data Fest. And today we will be joined by Matt Gordon, and he will be talking about dialoguing with your data, interactive AI with Azure Cognitive Services. So delighted to have you, Matt, and excited to be listening in on your presentation today. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a fun one. It's always nice. It's always nice to sneak it into a data crowd because this stuff's cool. And it's not, if you haven't run across it, you probably don't know kind of the power that it has. And I really just touched the surface here. So it is fun stuff to play with. And that is the top of the hour. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so hopefully this is what you're here for. Thanks to the Summer Azure Data Fest folks for putting this on and having us all. Unfortunately, I've been in and out of meetings today, so I've not been able to hit a lot of the other sessions, but the schedule looked awesome. So hopefully you've been able to catch some of the other sessions in this track or the other ones as well. Lots and lots of good stuff there. Here's a little bit about me. These are all the ways you can contact me. I definitely want feedback for this session. I don't know that there's a feedback form specific to the session or the track. But if you have, if you think it was really great, tweet that so everybody knows. If you think it was terrible, just email me and don't tell anybody else. Seriously though, whatever you think of it, good, bad, I always want these to improve and be more and more helpful each time I give them. And so even though I've done this one a few times, there's always things I can change to make it better. And this stuff goes at such a quick pace that certain things change, or maybe you feel like I should talk about something and I don't have it in here. So I'd love to hear about all that. And yeah, I'm SQL at Speed everywhere: Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn as well. My blog is sqlatspeed.com. Some of what I refer to today, I have blogged about. So this, with a 50-minute session, we don't have the ability to really dive deeply into a lot of these things. But especially when we talk about the sentiment analysis piece later, I've got a fairly in-depth blog on that. So if that really interests you, I think I linked to it in my resources slide at the end, but my blog does have some kind of deeper dives into some of this stuff here. And I work for Insight DI. So I'm not a salesperson, but we have a very strong data and AI team, and I like my job. So if anything I talk about in here sounds cool, but you think you just don't have the bandwidth as a team to start to work on this, we would love to help. And that's as salesy as I'll ever get. So here's a little bit more about me. What I want to draw your attention to is that last line. So I know this isn't a past event per se. One of the interesting things about dealing with this pandemic and all the good and bad things that have happened, mostly bad, there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, not only in a local group, but you can do a lot of this virtually. So you can kind of reach out to different groups, different regions, all those sorts of things. So, the fact that you're here trying to learn is awesome. And this is a really good time to try to give back to those same groups. So if you've been sitting here and say, wow, this is really good, this has helped me, try to find a past group by you or another user group. If you're Power BI person or .NET or Tableau or something, reach out to those groups. The kinds of connections you make there, you're gonna, worst cases, you're gonna learn stuff. Best cases, you're gonna connect with people that may become new friends or may help you get a new job or something like that. So if you're here and you feel like this helps, kind of pay that forward and try to reach out to other groups and see if you can't help them out as well. So as I mentioned, I'm SQL at Speed everywhere online, and that's really an excuse just to show this next slide. There we go. Yeah, so I get to drive race cars once in a while. Obviously, this year's been a challenge. But as much as I love talking about data and AI stuff, I love talking about racing more. So if you think the presentation was no good, but you like car racing, I'm happy to talk about that as well. But anyway, that's enough about me, enough setup. Let's dive into it. So for those of you who don't know, I'm going to lead off a bit with what Azure Cognitive Services are, and just a little bit of kind of what all they can do for us. But we're going to spend the most of our time with the language API itself. That's the list of demos there. This is a little bit tighter time frame than I usually give this session in, so that's why I say demos may include. If I don't get to the automated content moderation one, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to kind of walk you through how that works. And then we're going to end up, so we're going to kind of spend an hour here looking at stuff that's cool, that's interesting, but I want to wrap up with, what can we actually do with it? Because it's hard for me to go back to my boss and say, hey, I need to spend a week playing with this thing because I saw a session on it and it's cool. He's going to want to know what value I can bring back. And so I'm going to try to hopefully wrap up with some of that. And this is by no means a dive into everything we can do with this. This is really just features that I think are interesting or cool or potentially helpful. And what I hope you walk away from is not, wow, I've learned everything there is to know about the language API in 45 minutes. It's really, I kind of want you to walk away with, oh, that's cool. And now I have an idea of something I could do with that. Or something my team could do with that. So I really hope this is just kind of a starting point for you. So let's get started. So what is this stuff? If you've not heard of it, it's basically a set of APIs. Microsoft says what's in quotes there, sets of ML algorithms to solve problems in the field of AI. That is, I think, purposefully vague because these have evolved. I've been working with these, almost 3 years now. And it's changed a lot. So I think their description doesn't say a lot because they kind of want to give themselves a wide berth to change what you can do with this stuff. The more kind of layman's way to phrase this is they have pre-trained models here that you can call either with your own code or bots you make. And there's also some no-code options as well. And I'll walk you through some of that. So if you're sitting here or if you're sitting there at the end, you're like, man, that was really cool, but I'm not a programmer. I don't know C# or I don't know Python. There's no code or very low code ways to interact with this stuff. And I'm going to show some of that as well, because I know some people want to get their hands dirty with code and all that. And that's great. Some people are like me and lazy, and I don't want to write code if I don't have to. So it's nice that we have kind of all these different options to work with this. So how can you use them? Like I said, a standard REST call, you can do that here. And in fact, one of the demos I show is in C#. I'm by no means a C# dev, but I will kind of walk you through that to show that the code is not scary. So even if you decide, well, I need to write some code to plug this into some other application I have, it's not too bad. If I can do it, you can do it. And then we'll walk through some things like Logic Apps, Q&A Maker, things like that, where I didn't really write a line of code. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to play with these. Another nice thing about these is, we've seen Microsoft change a lot over the years in terms of embracing open source and some other things. But another thing they've really done aggressively well is improve their documentation. And Cognitive Services, the docs for this are excellent. For pretty much every API and then everything you can call within those. Not only can you go find a good reference that kind of specifies every parameter and argument and what you can send and what you should get back and all that, but on almost everything, they've also built quick starts and examples and things like that. So again, if you walk away from this and you're like, I want to go check the page out and see what all this thing can do, they make that pretty easy because ultimately they want you to use this stuff because they do get money for that and money's good. But yeah, there's a lot of easy entry points here. So if one demo I show you, you're like, I don't want to mess with that, there's other ways to interact with all of this. What is all of this? So the list as it currently stands, we've got kind of 5 major APIs. We've got Vision, which can be really fun. There's a lot of fun demos and things you can do there. Does what it sounds like, deals with images, videos, things like that. There's speech, and obviously speech and language interact pretty tightly. And one of the things that I'm going to show you is that the way, not just the language API, but a lot of these APIs work, let's say conversation style is pretty similar. There's a lot of JSON flying back and forth. So it's pretty human readable and kind of easy to break down and see what's going on. So if you feel like you had a good understanding of what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes, but maybe the language API wasn't your thing, or you can think of an application for speech or vision or something like that, you're going to see a lot of common structures there as well. So language is the third. That's what we're going to spend basically the rest of our time here talking about. We also have decision and web search as well, which does kind of exactly what it says there. All of these can be combined. So just because I'm spending most of my time talking about language, it doesn't mean that any application I write that calls the language API can't also call speech or can't also call vision or something like that. For me, the thing that kind of grabbed me here and made me interested in this stuff is language and speech, but that doesn't have to be the same for you at all. And like I said, you're going to, in the spots where I show return sets and things like that, it's JSON everywhere. And you're going to start, if you pay close attention to a couple of the demos, you're going to see some kind of common structures and common threads there. And that's a lot of this stuff is going to be universal across the whole suite. So any questions about the intro before we get into the language API itself? I'm going to take that as a no. And I will say I have more than enough content to go 50 minutes, but if you have questions or feedback, even mid-session, I prefer, even though this kind of venue is hard, interactivity is good. So if there's something that you're curious about, just drop that in the chat and we'll pick it up. Like I said, I've probably got 4 or 5 natural breaks in here. So don't be shy if there's something you want to ask about or know more about. That's kind of more fun for everybody. So what is the language API? So Microsoft says, with another kind of vague marketing-y thing, it increases your application's ability to read, comprehend, and enrich written text. Pretty vague, right? Again, that's intentionally that way because even, when I started out just playing with Twitter sentiment analysis because I was trying to get mentioned on a podcast, which is a story we can get to later, but it kind of opened the door to me for all the stuff that it can do. And when it started out, obviously it couldn't do near the things that it can now, but they're continuously improving this, investing in it. There's a lot of effort here to make this more and more usable and more powerful. So what do I say? I kind of look at this, and we'll talk about some things that, especially if you're coming to this from more of a DBA background or like internal IT or something, there's a couple of things that I'm going to show that I think are really helpful for those. But generally, the way I kind of see this has always kind of been planted in my head with more of a marketing focus where we're interacting with users we already have, customers we already have, or maybe ones we're trying to have. And you want that interaction with your company and your brand to be positive and useful. You don't want a customer to go to your site and search for a product or talk to the chat bot and then just close the window like, well, I'm not learning anything here at X, and then you've lost them to some other site. So we don't want to do that. And you'll hear me keep talking about the language API, but really what's underneath this is a whole bunch of these. So it's not just this one giant thing we're calling kind of individual things under that umbrella. So what can I do with it? Like I said at the start, this is by no means a complete list. This is just stuff I think is helpful and or cool, and things that I think I would want to go play with if I was walking out of this session. I do invite you to hit those docs because there's way more stuff here. But like I said, these are kind of the top 5 that I think are interesting and have applications, outside of some of the ones you may be thinking. And we can go ahead and dive into these from here. One note I do want to say is that the immersive reader thing that I'm going to talk about on the next slide or two is actually still in preview. That said, I actually used, for the podcast that I mentioned earlier, I used text analytics sentiment analysis, I would say in almost a production sense. I mean, we were doing millions of transactions every weekend. Those were in preview at that time, and we didn't experience any significant failures at all. So it seems to me that Mike, and this is no sort of official statement, it's no like MVP thing they fed me to say. I think that they're really reluctant to kind of move some of these Azure services out of being described as preview because they evolve so fast. But don't worry about this being unstable, because in my experience with any of this cognitive services stuff that was flagged as being in preview, it's pretty stable. Now, having said that, I'm sure one of my demos is about to break. But now that I've knocked on wood, we fixed that. And so let's dive into what Immersive Reader actually does. So I think this is pretty interesting. Their kind of official language there is it helps. And I do want to highlight this because even though I've kind of poked a bit of fun at them up until this point, like the stuff the site says is vague, this I actually think is perfect. So what they say is it helps emerging readers, language learners, and people with learning differences absorb the written content on your site or in your app. It kind of does exactly that. So there's tools in here that helps somebody who's learning to read kind of absorb that. Help somebody who's coming to, let's say, English from another language. You can kind of see how some of this would help them. And then it does introduce a lot of visual things and things like that. So people who learn differently, this helps them interact with your site. And like I said, if you're coming from the perspective of you want a user's experience in your app or on your site to be positive, that whatever it is you're selling or providing or marketing or whatever, you want them to walk away feeling good about the time they spent. This is one of those tools that helps that. So the example of some of the things you can do here, you can change the viewable size of the text, which helps folks that may struggle to see, especially small type. You can display tooltip pictures of commonly used words, which again kind of goes back to that visual component. If you learn differently, or if you're being introduced to the language, pictures certainly help there. You can also highlight sentence structure and things like that, nouns, verbs, elements of a sentence. So if you're trying to teach or learn grammar and things like that, that can certainly help you out. It can read the content out loud. So then that opens your site to folks that may not be able to see it all or see well enough where they can interact with the site. It still is going to make their experience positive. It can display the syllables of words. And one thing that's really cool is it actually uses the translator API, which is one of the things I'll show later, to translate the content back and forth into other languages as well. So very helpful here. This isn't, when you think about what it's doing under the covers, it's cool. This probably isn't one of the things you're going to walk away from and say, oh, wow, that was really cool when you talked about that. But again, if you're trying to have a more inclusive and positive experience in your app, on your site, whatever, this group of technologies really helps that. And I think I heard a mic open up. So does somebody have a question? Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about, and I'm kind of working through that list from that early slide, is we're going to briefly look at what the Language Understanding Intelligence Service is. That does not really roll off my tongue, at least. Luis does, and that's how they call this. So what it does, and I'm going to show you briefly just their basic demo. If you go to the Luis portal, just a brief example of what it works. This topic and Q&A Maker, which I'll talk about next, go very much hand in hand here. And really the way I perceive it is that Luis is kind of the grown-up version of what Q&A Maker is, but you have to work harder to make it do that. It's much more flexible in terms of being able to have like a chat bot and things like that. It's a little more flexible and versatile within the conversation, where Q&A Maker, like we'll see, is really cool. You can build stuff really fast that's useful, but it's the level of intelligence really isn't there. You can ask it a specific thing and you'll get the right answer. And if you tweak the wording slightly, you'll not get the answer you think you should. So what I'm going to show you here is it walks through a request that it gets and tries to pull out the entities and basically what you're asking. It will return a JSON object back to whatever calls it. like I mentioned, this is typically used in chat bots and things like that. So if you've gone to a site and you've interacted with the very friendly person who comes up in the corner and says, "How may I help you?" or "What are you trying to find?" You're probably talking to something like this. It's unlikely you're talking to the person who is very smiley and friendly and nice. You're talking to a bot. One other thing this does is it has pre-built models that it comes with, and what I'll show you on the site is obviously just kind of out of the box what it does, but it allows you to create custom models as well. So the example I always like to think of with that is where I live. Obviously, Kentucky is horse everything, horse racing, eventing, all anywhere you can race a horse, jump a horse, whatever. Some farm or some place around here does that. But speaking as a car racing guy, horse events have their own kind of jargon, just like we do. And there's words that we'll use in car racing or they'll use in horse racing that mean different. When somebody in that industry says it, the rest of society doesn't understand it. So with something like this, like if you had a tack shop and you're selling, saddles and things like that, the pre-built model may not work for you. But the ability to create a custom model that's suited to kind of the jargon and terminology of whatever you want the bot to talk about, you have the ability to do that here, which is cool. So Luis can be called via APIs, just like anything else we've talked about here. And there's also a portal, and the portal is what I'm going to show you now. And I will, if there are questions, happy to entertain those while I get flipped over here. Okay, so all I've done here, so everything I'm going to show you after this I've built. This I haven't built at all. I just went to this site, which is kind of their portal for all of this stuff. Again, really strong documentation here, strong explanations of what it does, and good examples of what you can do with it. The initial thing you get is here. So normally I do the book me a flight to Cairo, but talking about flying is depressing right now. So instead, I'm going to eat my feelings and order a pizza. And so here's what I've sent the Luis powered bot. It says, order me 2 pizzas. So the first thing it tries to classify is behind the scenes before you get to this, the people that built this have put together intents. So it can be a food order, can be nothing, can be location finder, a reminder, or book flight, which are all maybe kind of conversation paths that you can walk down. This one, it says it's 99% confident that they're trying to order food. So it classifies the intent first, and the prediction that comes back is, all right, I'm reasonably confident this is a food order. So whatever's calling this, you go into kind of the food order logic flow and go from there. But it also classifies the entities as well. So it knows it's a food order, but what kind of food is it? So when you get down to this part of the JSON down here, it said, the sentence said, order me 2 pizzas. So the language understanding at work here says, oh, okay, so that's 2 of the things. And then what are the things? And previous to this, you've put together food types, which could be, burgers, pasta, all sorts of things. Pizza was one of those elements. So what you're building these lists of this, and that's why I say Luis is harder work than Q&A Maker, but it's smarter. And this is a very basic example of kind of what it can do. You can build really rich models here, but unfortunately in this time, kind of trying to show a lot of stuff, we don't have time to really dive into that. But hopefully that's kind of a brief understanding of what Luis does, and the fact that you can tell it things and it will say, okay, here's what the person's trying to do. Here's the number of things they're talking about. Here's the thing they're talking about. And then that can integrate with your app, and you can, kick off workflows from those sorts of things. So let's go back to the slides. And let's go through Q&A Maker, since I kind of spent the last few minutes talking about these interchangeably. So it's really well named because that's exactly what it does. It It basically gives you a question and answer bot. So you can serve that information interactively. It drives off what they call knowledge bases. And I'll give you an example of one after we talk to the one that I made. But these can be, you can get these from a multitude of sources. It could be an FAQ page on a site. It can be, I think, comma separated files, tabs separated files. And you can actually type a bunch of questions and answers in yourself, just kind of raw text. And I'll show you how you can do that. You'll see that it operates very similarly to the chatbot that you would imagine we were talking to in the example I just showed, but it's not, like I said, that layer of intelligence is gone. So it's very fixed. If it sees a question that it thinks fits tightly the phrasing of what you asked, it will serve you the answer to that. What I'll show you is when you tweak it a little bit, where Luis is probably smart enough to at least respond with, can you clarify that, or something, or actually understand that the two similar phrases are basically the same. Q&A Maker is not, because it's just out of the box quick, and if it doesn't know what you said, then it doesn't know what you said. So the flexibility in Q&A Maker comes from the information you provide, and not really the implementation and intelligence that Luis itself has. So let's take a quick look at this. So what I'm going to do here is I set up a bot, and we're just going to talk to it. So let's imagine, as I mentioned, I sometimes like to drive race cars when calendar and budget allow me to do that. And let's imagine, and of course it's a company reboot. That was fun. Let's not do that right now. Okay, let's imagine that my wife was out shopping for a gift for me, and she knows I like to do fun stuff with fast cars. So she's gone and found a place where I can drive a fast street car with an instructor and learn how to be a better, faster driver and all those sorts of things. So let's imagine that I'm on a site that does that. And so I have some questions for them. So you can say, what is the speed limit? Because I want to know how fast I can go, right? And the bot's going to chew on that for a minute. No speed limit. And let's say that my wife knows that one of my buddies likes to do this too. And while she's not going to pay for him, she wants to make sure that I could like bring him along as a guest or something. So I ask the helpful bot, can I bring guests? And it says, yes, guests are free to join. Great. So imagine that somebody else comes in right behind that. And they don't say, can I bring guests? They say, can I bring other people? Which again, like we've talked about, Luis's more nuanced understanding is going to outsmart this. Q&A Maker, when I say, can I bring other people, finds the answer that talks about people and gives me basically the wrong one. Because what I've done here is ask, if I was talking to a human, they would understand, oh, guess other people. That's basically the same thing. They want to know if people can come with them. Q&A Maker does not. So let's now we'll imagine that this bot was on a site. So let's go from there to what actually drives it and kind of understand what happened there. So the knowledge base is from this site. I have never been here. I am not endorsing them. I don't know if they're any good or not, but they certainly provided a very useful demo for the stock when I was building it several months ago. So this is their FAQ page, and it's kind of format that we're all used to. You just click here and you kind of go through and it tells you when they're open and all those sorts of things. So how did I bring this into Q&A Maker so we could talk to it? So what I did is basically created a knowledge base from this link, and I'll go there in a minute. But I want to kind of show you. So when I created the knowledge base, you can see the source is here. It's that page we were just on. And all I did was say, the knowledge base is here. Make me a Q&A Maker resource that I can wire a bot to. And that's it. And I point it at that site. And then what it does is it, and I'm pointing at the screen, which is not useful because you can't see that. But what it does is it formats the questions and answers exactly the way we would think. And you'll note So the problem we just talked about, where there's not a nuanced understanding out of the box, you can get logs of everything that's being asked to your bot. So if a lot of people keep asking your bot, can I bring other people? And it gives the kind of misleading answer it just did. You can add alternative phrasing here. Say, well, I know that FAQ starting out says, can I bring guests, and gives you a good answer to that. I want to add this alternative phrasing here. Can I bring other people, so I get the relevant answer? So let's briefly talk about how we create one of those. So kind of scroll all the way through. This does take a few minutes, so I'm not going to go through the entire process, but I am going to kind of walk you through it. So your first step, just like with any of this, is you're going to create a Q&A service in Microsoft Azure. So like if you want to go play with Cognitive Services, you create a Cognitive Services resource, and then you would spin off that and create one of these as well. You then connect your service to your knowledge base, and so this gets deeply into kind of how things authenticate and know about each other across Azure. If you go to my blog at sqlatspeed.com and search deep dive, I kind of dive deeply into what these terms, specifically directory ID and subscription name, mean, along with some other things you're going to see with Cognitive Services stuff, application keys, things like that. Really dry, I think, for a short session like this. But like I said, it's on my blog, and I do kind of go through with screenshots what all of this actually means, because sometimes the names are a bit misleading. But anyway, so we've made a service. We're going to tie it to our knowledge base. We're going to tell it what language that's in. I'm going to give it a name. And then here, you can see where it says we can extract these pairs from an online FAQ. The supported formats are what I've already talked about, and then some. You can get things out of Word, out of Excel, like I said, tab separated, comma separated, PDFs. You can, and I've had varying degrees of success with this, where if it's more of like almost a scripted conversation, you can enable that multi-turn extraction. It's pretty cool. It's not 100% right. So what I did when I built the one we just saw is I put the URL here, and then you can also give your bot kind of a personality. I went with none, so it kind of matched me. But you can tell it to be professional, friendly, witty, so it will try to be funny, caring, and it's pretty interesting to kind of change those and see how feeding off the same source, what they've done behind the scenes to alter that personality a bit. And you get down here and create it, and several minutes later you have basically what I just showed and what we just talked to. So while I'm flipping back to the slides, Alicia, are there any questions?
Not at this time.
I am blowing everybody away, I guess, or they've all gone to sleep after lunch. One of the two.
No, this is fantastic. I didn't realize it was this easy to integrate questions into the Q&A maker. So thank you.
It's I work hard to be lazy. So yeah, when I find stuff that's easy and cool, I like to share it, because I didn't really, until I kind of started building the idea for this talk and wanting to show some other language API stuff. I mean, some of this stuff is really easy, and I can think of a lot of different uses for it too. So let's get into text analytics a bit. I've highlighted 4 things that I think are interesting here, and these are those first 4 points. Just like everything else I've talked about here, by no means is that all it can do. I think this is stuff that's cool, or I think that it's something that somebody's going to walk out of a session and be like, oh, I didn't know it could do that, and I can think of some interesting ways to do just that. So we'll briefly go through these, and then I have a sentiment analysis demo here at the end of this part. So key phrase extraction does exactly what it sounds like. You can pull key phrases from sections of text. Oddly enough, the documentation kind of pointedly points out that it works better on unstructured text than like paragraphs of a letter or something. It still works on those, but unstructured text, it works a little better. So you can imagine where a company might use this to almost make a word cloud out of, like, let's say they released a new version of a software, and they open the support forum, and people are going in there saying, oh, new version's great, or the new version's lousy, or whatever. You could use key phrase extraction along with sentiment analysis and some of these other things, to start pulling out phrases that are seen a lot. And you're going to get a pretty early sense, like, are people really happy with this? Or are they really upset? If the key phrases have a lot of swear words in them, it's probably not gone well. So key phrase extraction is one thing. Language detection is exactly what it sounds like in the demo I show for translator at the end. You'll see that in action. But it's exactly what it sounds like. I think this is English. I think this is German, whatever. And then there's a confidence score that goes along with it. Named entity recognition is a little bit tricky. And the naming is a little bit weird. So they call the feature, and I use that term loosely, named entity recognition. When you dive into the documentation, it will tell you that named entity recognition actually contains named entity recognition itself, the name of the feature, and something called entity linking. So entity linking is kind of like, when you see a chunk of text, maybe it's like a Facebook post or something like that. If you've activated that on a website or in your app or something, as it starts to detect dates and locations and things like that, it will link to Microsoft resources, Bing Maps and things like that. So you could map the address, or it'll highlight the phone number. And if you're on a mobile device, you have an interaction you can use from your site or app to call that. So entity linking is kind of connecting you with whatever it thinks the thing is. People, places, dates. You can make calendar appointments. So that's something I think we maybe didn't know what it was called. We've all probably seen it. Named entity recognition is kind of interesting. So it tries to identify things it sees in text, and kind of almost as it sees fit, it will link you to, or it pulls from a knowledge base of information to help the software disambiguate terms. So it will pull from context clues and the knowledge base, which oddly enough behind the scenes is Wikipedia, according to the docs. It will give enough context clues to link to the right thing. So if the word Venus is in the sentence, it will try to understand, are you talking about the goddess? Are you talking about the planet? And then appropriately link to some resources for that. So kind of interesting. A lot of that stuff doesn't really roll off the tongue, but kind of interesting to know how that happens, and that we have the ability to build that into our apps as well. Sentiment analysis is the last thing here. And that leads us to a demo when my slide decides to advance, which is now. Cool. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is what I built with Logic Apps. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go here, we're going to go, and we're going to look at, okay, so we're going to look at something I built a couple years ago, and I just kind of want you to understand what a Logic App is. So what a Logic App is basically, it's a container, and not in the sense, especially those of you coming from database backgrounds and admin backgrounds and things like that. It's an event-driven workflow container. So it's serverless. Of course, it runs on a server somewhere, but it's a workflow that spins up when an event happens. So every Logic App you see drives off some sort of initial event. And this one happens to be when a new tweet is posted. And so what happens is, when you enable this and start running it, you can have a search text, and this can include hashtags and usernames and things like that. And it will essentially wake up and poll for whatever that is. And this particular one uses the Twitter search API to do that. So they do have some pretty strict kind of gating requirements. It will check according to the interval you specify. However, I have a story about this. That lies. And what happens is, so what got me into cognitive services and all this stuff is, there's a soccer podcast that I listen to, and they joked one year, one of the teams had won like their first 10 matches, and they joked that they were going to in the podcast because talking about what happened didn't matter because that team was going to win the title. None of the results counted and they didn't care. It was a joke. Basically everything on the show is. It's not serious soccer. But they joked. They said, all that really matters is the feelings of the fans, the ones at the pubs or the ones at the matches, and that they would only continue the podcast if they had a way to score feelings. And I had just read a blog about this, from a guy who works for Microsoft now, who I actually used to work for, Brad Ball, SQL Balls on Twitter, worth a follow. This stuff was all really, really new then. And so, yeah, I got pulled into it this way. And what we started doing was an English Premier League mood table. And so we built a logic app. I did built a logic app for all 20 clubs that would basically wake up during a match, take a poll of tweets. And, when we were running it kind of at its height, we were processing 20 or 25 million tweets across 20 clubs every weekend. And like I said, that's all stuff in preview. So you can feel reasonably confident that this stuff's stable. Most of the failures were things that I had messed up. So I tell that story both so you kind of understand that it's kind of cool to keep your ears open because you may get pulled into some cool tech stuff from an avenue that you would never expect, like a soccer podcast with two guys who are not techie at all, but it introduced me to all this stuff. So keep your ears open for that, but it's also to set up the story about how this particular part of the Logic app lies. So we were monitoring, worldwide clubs with fans everywhere. So tweets would come in all throughout the match from all time zones. And I had the interval the first time I set this up when they had agreed to have it on the pod. And I was really excited because I was a fan of the pod and they were going to talk about me and all this stuff. I set this to check every 15 minutes. So for a soccer match, 90 minutes plus halftime, we're going to get kind of 7 samples of what the tweets about each club were. And I got it all running and I was all excited, because it was fun nerd stuff. And I was going to be on this pod that I've loved for years and told my wife, and she's like, okay, great. And then we left to go to the store. Like all the matches that morning started at 10 a.m., left to go to the store. I've got my Azure app on my phone. I see that everything's running. I'm like, great, awesome. Get home that night and just check to make sure that all the apps disabled on schedule like they were supposed to and all that. And I go to my billing tab and it's over $700 from one day. And what I learned, thanks to a very helpful Azure support resource and all that, is that the documentation here is not actually correct. So the problem we were having is, even though I had it set to check every 15 minutes, when that initial check happened, the events never stopped. So it woke up and said, I want you to search for tweets about Arsenal. And you can imagine during a match, like it never stops. There's just a constant flood of tweets. And so basically what checks never went to sleep. So the interval never sets. So if you're monitoring like a major company's hashtag or handle or something like that, be cognizant of that here because it can get pretty expensive. Long story short, they actually agreed that was a bug in the doc and refunded that initial money. And my wife was very pleased about that. But so that's kind of how this works. So it searched for text, it went out and pulled stuff. Then you feed it to a detect sentiment action, which is from the Cognitive Services resource that I provisioned at the start. And like I said, if you go to my blog at sqlatspeed.com and search deep dive, I go into gory details about how you actually build all this. But I didn't write a line of code to do this. And so I would say take the text from the tweet, and this is all dynamic here. So when you click in here, it'll allow you to pull everything from the Twitter connector. Basically any element it finds you can pull into this or any other action and score the tweet text. And this particular one actually sends it to a Power BI streaming data set. But what I'm going to show you is what I did a lot more was send it to an Azure SQL database via that kind of connection. So let's look at what sentiment analysis is. It's basically a numerical score of the positivity or negativity of the statement. And actually now in version 3 of Cognitive Services, what I'm showing you is version 2.0 of the API. In version 3, you actually get a much more nuanced view if you want it. So in version 2, you got a score. 1 is very positive, 0 is very negative, and that's it. In version 3, it will actually score sections. So maybe it doesn't work so well for tweets, but for longer things, it will say, the first third of this was, 75% positive, and then the middle third was 80% negative, and things like that. So if you want to consume it that way, you can. So let's look at kind of a sample of what this is, and I'll apologize in advance. This was actually raw data for a client I had on a side gig I was doing with some soccer clubs here in the States. If you see raw language, this was raw feed during a game. My apologies. So here's somebody. This was my first soccer pro game. I enjoyed it so much. Thanks to the club, blah, blah, blah. You scroll over. Cognitive Services gives that a 0.9899. Really happy, right? Let's look at a bad one. And this is the result set that it put in the Azure SQL database. So this is a raw query of things that I saved off. So this person says it's frustrating to see so many calls missed on a particular player because he doesn't go down every time he's kicked. So if you don't know much about soccer or whatever, you may not know if that's like positive or negative, or you're not sure how it's going to score that. It scored it pretty low because it knew the guy was frustrated, and he actually used that phrase there. So briefly, that's one way you can interact with the sentiment analysis part of the text analytics API. So let's flip back to the slides. Got just a couple more, one more demo, and then we'll be on to the next session. Translator text. So what can you do with it? You can do kind of exactly what you think with it. So you can translate text using what's called neural machine translation, which people far smarter than I am came up with. So there's two types, and if you go into the Cognitive Services docs, you're going to see this. So neural machine translation is using neural networks to do this. It's a more precise translation. There's also statistical machine translation, which you'll see in the docs, called SMT. That is not as precise, and so some of the languages, kind of as they incorporate it, as they add it to the translator API, you'll see them as SMT only as first, and then as they build these models out and build the networks and things like that, you'll get to NMT, which is going to be a better one. So you can translate text. You can also convert text from one alphabet to another, which is pretty interesting. It will detect language, as you would think it kind of has to do that to do its part. You can look up word translations as well. This is only text. Now, the speech service does something similar with speech translation. I'd love to give a whole session on it, but it really does deserve its own session. It's really cool. Again, it operates kind of the same way. So if you build something here like this is going to give you that as well. Let's briefly take a look at that before we wrap this up. So we're going to run an app that I built. So what phrase would I like to translate? Thank you for coming. Never type live, right? Coming to my session. So you see right here, the raw JSON that comes back, I've outputted first. But what's more interesting is the set down here. So it detected that it's English. It's very confident of that. Confidence score is 1. That's as high as it's going to be. So if it's not sure, like if you throw another language at it, it may say like 0.8 or something like that. It knows this. And then it translated into English, Italian, German, and what the Cognitive Services documentation says is Klingon. And it did it just that fast. So that's basic translation. Let me briefly show you the app that I put together to do this. So again, this is C#. This is driven off an example that's in a quick start on their site. I'm not a C# dev by any means, but when I built this for this session, it probably took me about 30 minutes. So it's not scary. You can see where it brings the phrase in here. It takes the subscription key and the endpoint, which again, the deep dive on my blog will go into in detail kind of what those are relating to Cognitive Services. And then down here, all it really does is it deserializes the JSON that comes back. So it just chops it up into kind of each individual array of objects, and it outputs it. And that's all there really is to that. Again, it's powerful, but also kind of really basic at the same time, but we can do a lot with it. So let's dive into, in the last couple minutes here, a couple more things. So we've talked about the translator app. We did not get to the bonus demo. If you're really interested in this, like I said, I'm happy to walk you through it offline. It basically helps you moderate content on like a message board or something like that for PII, for profanity, those sorts of things. And it's automated and it's part of the Cognitive Services suite as well. So like I said, we're going to wrap up with what can companies do with this stuff. So we went over what the reader can do. And like I said, there's lots of good tutorials for that, because I think they understand a lot of the people who might be trying to implement that in an app or a site might not be coming from a deeply technical background at all, but they want kind of the services that it offers. So there's a great tutorial that I linked to on my resources slide for that. Luis, we talked about lots of customer interaction in an app or even on site. Like you see some places where you go up to a screen to like a portal and you're talking back and forth. Luis can power all that. We showed the JSON behind the scenes, but you can build it with or without code. So you can either call it from APIs or you can incorporate it into a chatbot like I did, like the front end I showed basically for Q&A. And one thing I think is really useful, so you may be sitting here and saying like, this stuff is cool, but I don't think I can use it at work at all. So if you're a DBA or you're in IT or something, and you get a lot of questions like, what's the QA environment for this thing? Or what server does this live on? You can build a Q&A knowledge base to give, and you can just send people to a site and say, well, we have a site where you can ask, what's the database server for app A? It's the QA environment for app B, and you could power all that, and you could set it up in a day easily. Text analytics, we talked about sentiment analysis, and if you have any sort of an online presence at all, you want to know how people feel about you, especially if you're trying to sell things. We talked about how you can kind of combine it with a lot of things to know how people are talking about you in support portals, message boards, things like that. You want a good picture of that customer interaction. You can't necessarily trust surveys and polls. You want to kind of get that raw stuff, whether it's Facebook comments, whether it's tweets, whether it's knowledge-based stuff. You want to know what people are thinking about you. And, again, we can build a logic app to do that. And you saw there wasn't a line of code in there. It's basically 3 steps. And then you can write simple T-SQL queries to get that out of an Azure SQL database. We wrapped it up with translator text, which I think is really cool. So you can wrap that into some of those chatbots and things like that, and be able to speak to users in whatever their native language may be. I think there's neural machine translation of over 50 languages now, with more being added all the time. So that's really powerful if you're a global brand, and it's really fun to play with as well. Can also help smooth the bumps. Like localizing software is really expensive. And to do it right, you probably have to bring a lot of people in and native speakers and all of that. Translator can give you a huge head start on that, where you can localize your app, probably engage with somebody to kind of review it to make sure that the machine translation was appropriate, and then you can move forward and you don't have to have a team of folks doing that. Resources slide is here. Here are all the ways to find me. Thank you so much for having me at this event. I think we've got 8 minutes till the next session, so if there are questions, I can take them. If not, I will hand it back to the organizers.
Thanks, Matt. That was really interesting. And you went through so many demos. So this was great.
Thanks. Yeah, it's it probably works a little better as a 60-minute session, but I hope folks kind of grab something in there that they thought was cool, and then they take it out of this and go play with it.
Absolutely. So I went ahead and pinged Matt's website, his blog site, into the chat, and you can feel free to connect with him on LinkedIn.
So it looks like now that I've stopped sharing and I can pull up Teams. So somebody asked in reference to Q&A makers, English the default language. It seems to be, but on the other hand, and I don't demo it, but I was able to point that to, it was a FAQ site for some German thing that sold like motorcycles, and I was able to basically plug it in just the way that I showed and just the way that I built mine. So I think it's when you populate it the way I did, I think it will take the language and understand it. At least it seemed to for me. I think it probably technically defaults to English, but it's going to mold itself around whatever language the site is in that you point to.
Can I add to that real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, during creation of Q&A Maker service, you can select a different language. So by default, it's English, but you do get a drop down where I don't think like all the languages are supported right now. I think popular 12 to 15 languages are there, and German is one of them.
Yes, actually, I still have that screen up. And yeah, so the language selection, yeah, so what we've got is chit chat and extraction available. It says Chinese simplified, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Spanish. Only extraction available, which is probably the German one that I played with. That's a much longer list. I'm not going to read all of it, but you don't get the conversational element. So it looks like right now you can select 9 languages and get both the Q&A extraction and the chit chat. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm actually gonna head to a meeting, but hopefully folks can hang out and enjoy the rest of this. Like I said, there's so many good sessions across tracks. There's definitely something for everybody here. So thanks for having me, and stay safe.
Thank you, Matt. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Hi, Eliza. Let me know if you can see my screen. I have shared the PowerPoint deck.
Hi, Prasant. This is Dwayne. I can see your screen.
Oh, perfect. So you will be taking care of recording, starting recording and stopping recording?
Yes, I will.
Okay. I think looks like the recording is still going on from previous session. Can you stop it?
I don't think I have the capability of doing that.
Oh, yeah. I think Tim started it, so I think he's the one who has to stop it.
Yeah.
I have text him, so let's see. Maybe he's just hopping around between multiple sessions. If he does not stop, that's fine because we can still use the same recording. Since it's the last session of the day, we will just want to start on time. So we'll start at right at 2 p.m.
Okay, that'd be great.
So we will start in a minute. And this will be the last session of the day in the AI ML track. All right, it's 2 p.m. Eastern time. So welcome everyone. The title of the last session of the day is Building Intelligent Bots using Microsoft Bot Framework and Cognitive Services. Who am I? My name is Prashant G. Boyer. I was born and raised in India. I came to United States back in 2007. I'm University of Maryland College Park alumni. I co-authored a book called PowerShell for Office 65. I also acted as a technical reviewer for the book Pro SharePoint 2013 Administration. I am one of the organizers of this event, and we run multiple user groups in Washington, D.C. area. One is on AI and machine learning. Another one is on Office 65. And I also help running the Northern Virginia SQL user group as well. As I mentioned, I'm one of the organizers of this event, and the next conference that is coming up is going to be on 31st of July. Again, the format will be same. It will be a virtual conference, and you can join from anywhere. And the focus of that conference is going to be AI and machine learning for everyone. So it doesn't matter whether you are a data scientist, whether you are a developer, or whether you are a business user. We will be having content for everyone. I also help organize a global AI bootcamp, which we will be most likely organizing in early January next year. Depending on how is the situation with COVID-19, we will decide whether to have that as an in-person or a virtual event only. Apart from Global Data Fest and Global AI Fest and Global AI Bootcamp, I also help organize SharePoint Saturday Baltimore and SharePoint Saturday DC event. I am recipient of Antarctic Service Medal, and I am also recipient of Microsoft MVP Award since 2017. Those of you who are not familiar with this award, so I don't work for Microsoft. It's just the additional recognition that Microsoft gives out to the folks who does technical contribution via writing blogs, speaking at the conferences, providing direct feedback to the product group, and also solving people's questions on various forums. And this award is valid for 12 months. And after 12 months, we have to submit our application for review. And yesterday was the day when Microsoft announced the results for the renewal application. And I came to know yesterday that I have been awarded MVP in AI category for another 12 months. When I got awarded for the first time in 2017, I was a SharePoint MVP, and I made a transition to AI last year. So right now I'm working as a senior solution architect with a company called Witham Digital. We are based in East Coast of United States, and my location is